Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 11, the perfect society for social classes. This is text 31. Prayakshva bhava vihito nrinam dharma juge veda drigbi smito rajan pritya cheha chasharmakrit praya generally svabhava vihita prescribed according to one's material modes of nature. Nrinam of human society. Dharmaha the occupational duty. Yuge in every age. Vedadrigbihi by brahmanas well conversant in the Vedic knowledge. Smrita recognized. Rajan, O king. Pritya after death. Cha and Iha here in this body. Cha also Sharmakrit auspicious. Srila Prabhupada's translation, my dear king, Brahmanas well conversant in Vedic knowledge have given their verdict that in every age, yuga, the conduct of different sections of people according to their material modes of nature is auspicious both in this life and after death. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In Bhagavad-Gita 3:35, it is said, Shreyans Swadharma Vigana Paradharmat Svanushtitat. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. The Antyajas, the men of lower classes, are accustomed to stealing, drinking, and illicit sex. But that is not considered sinful. For example, if a tiger kills a man, this is not sinful. But if a man kills another man, this is considered sinful and the killer is hanged. What is a daily affair among the animals is a sinful act in human society. Thus, according to the symptoms of the higher and lower sections of society, there are different varieties of occupational duties. According to the experts in Vedic knowledge, these duties are prescribed in terms of the age concerned. Om Gana Timirandasya Ganangana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitang Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Ram Sagrajatam Parijana Sahitam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasandobhyevacha Paridanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. First, let me ask for your forbearance. It's been a long time since I've given a class. Over 35 years. For about 28 of the last 30 years, my studies have been in project plans and specifications for building roads and bridges. So my Shastric references are maybe a little bit thin. I beg your forbearance in that regard and your mercy. This chapter 11 is the first of two chapters dealing with the Varnashram system. After hearing of the qualities and activities of Prahlad Maharaj, the glories of Prahlad Maharaj, Maharaj Yudhisthira requested Narad Muni to describe the perfect society, the perfect Vedic society, how men could be elevated, how humans could be elevated to devotional service like Prahlad Maharaj, to follow in the footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj. So Narad Muni in this chapter has been discussing the first of Varnas, the social classes, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and in these last two verses, those who are outside of those classifications, the Chandalas, so-called dog eaters, and in this verse specifically, those who are completely outside, who in the perfect society, the Kshatriyas, the managers, the police are charged with excluding the influence of these mlechas and yavanas from being able to influence society. However, under the mercy of the Lord, even those have the opportunity, the open opportunity to advance, to come to their senses. We have one quotation in the Bhagavad-Gita here, where Srila Prabhupada, this is, in the purport of this Bhagavatam verse that we're dealing with today, Srila Prabhupada initially references Bhagavad-Gita 3:35 about doing one's own duty being far superior, even if imperfect, than doing another duty perfectly. And two verses later, Arjuna has asked Krishna, what is it that forces a man, a human being, to act sinfully, even when it appears that he's forced to do so? What is it? How does this happen? And Krishna says very straightforwardly, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath. This sin, this lust, is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world and of the living entity, the conditioned souls. In this purport, I'll read one paragraph. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities, all of us are part and parcel of that spiritual bliss. They have also partial independence, but by misuse of that independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, when it's transformed into the selfish enjoying spirit, then we come under the sway of lust, of straining to enjoy the material elements by passing them through the senses, as Srila Bhakti-santa said, processing them through the senses, trying to find happiness. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. And when we become completely baffled, as Srila Prabhupada says, love that term, completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities which we find lead nowhere, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of spiritual life, of reawakening, and in the beginning, it's also the beginning of Vedanta Sutras. Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Now is the time to inquire into the nature of the supreme truth, the nature of the supreme. In Vedanta Sutra, then the next statement is that the supreme truth is Brahman, Krishna, Bhagavan. This section on the social classes, ideal social classes in society, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, the Varnas, as opposed to the ashramas. Practically speaking, it's nearly inoperable in this Kali Yuga. These Varnas, Srila Prabhupada said, we're all born as Shudras or less. At the same time, it's made very clear that the Varnashram system in general is a material system. It's meant to conduct, and it is the religion of human society. It's meant to conduct each individual towards their original constitutional nature as associates, servants, lovers of Srila Prabhupada, of Sri Krishna. And this is accomplished ultimately not through Varnashram. Varnashram is meant to elevate gradually. The whole Vedic literature is meant to elevate gradually the conditioned souls towards devotional service. The ashramas, of course, brahmachari, grihastha, householders, vanaprastha, retired from household life, and sannyas, the renounced order of life, are a little more clear to us in this age, because we willfully, intentionally take on these statuses, these functions, these identities, in fact, albeit temporary. Whereas the Varnas, again, it's very difficult to understand how the Varnas can be be active in this age, but it's very difficult to understand what the nature of each individual is. We do have, as Mataji Narayani pointed out a couple of days ago, there is spontaneous varnashram. There is spontaneous varnas in the deluded world where you have, yes, you have directors of society. They're the people with the money. That's a perverted reflection. They're not actual brahmanas, but because they have the money, as it says, the old golden rule is whoever has the gold rules. And so that is how the perverted system is working now. Of course, with that, as far as the directors of the directors of the Kshatriyas, the directors of the military or the police, these are the rich people. And then, of course, then there are the merchants and the bankers. But everyone essentially in this age is born as Shudra or less. And for our understanding as aspiring devotees of the Lord, we do need to understand that although, as Srila Prabhupada said, we've all come from Mlechas and Yavanas, and yet by this training, we become better than Brahmins, greater than Brahmins. We become Vaishnavas, ideally Vaishnava Brahmins. So in the future, at some point in the future, in this golden age of Kali Yuga, I don't think it will be in my current lifetime or any of my next dozen or so, but I believe that gradually a proper varnashram system may be developed, which will help conduct more people, more conditioned souls towards their spiritual perfection, their spiritual realization as servants of the Lord. And this can be done through the parampara system. Srila Prabhupada has introduced us to this parampara system, and that will gradually take hold. The varnashram system will gradually take hold in human society, despite human society today being steeped in Western so-called civilization. We even see we see the effects of the Western so-called civilization here in India. Very painfully we see it. Here in the West, it's all you see practically, except when you see the Vaishnavas. Mahatma Gandhi was asked what he thought of Western civilization. His response was that I think it would be a very good idea, but in other words, it is not civilization. It is the civilization of Mlechas and Yavanas. Again, we should recognize that the varnashram system amounts to material religiosity. I do have one section here in Nectar of Devotion. Some scholars argue that simply by following the principles of Varna and Ashram, one can gradually rise to the perfections reached by practicing devotional service. But this argument is not accepted by the great authorities. Lord Chaitanya also condemned this idea while he was speaking with Ramananda Roy about the gradual development of devotional service. He rejected the idea of the importance of Varnashram Dharma when it was put forward by Ramananda Roy. There is a higher principle. In Bhagavad-Gita also, the Lord says that one has to give up all other principles of elevation and take simply to the method of Krishna consciousness. That will help one achieve the highest perfection of life. Krishna himself says in the 11th canto, one should execute the prescribed duties of Varna and Ashram as long as he has not developed spontaneous attachment for hearing about my pastimes and activities. Srila Prabhupada comments here on that point that, in other words, The prescribed duties of varna and ashram are ritualistic ceremonies of religion intended for economic development, sense gratification, or salvation. All these things are recommended for persons who have not developed Krishna consciousness. In fact, all such activities are recommended in the revealed scriptures only to bring one to the point of Krishna consciousness. In the, I believe it was the 8th through 12th verses in this chapter, there was a listed were 30 qualities necessary for one to be considered a human being in the first place. Now, those 30 qualities are quite elevated, quite invisible in Western society nowadays. But some of us have noted, it has been noted that of those 30 qualities, and we were talking about simplicity. Let's look at them. Just look at a few of them very quickly here. Truthfulness, mercy, austerity, cleanliness, tolerance, discrimination between right and wrong, control of the mind, control of the senses, nonviolence. It's a list of 30 items. The final 9 items are the 9 processes of devotional service. They are synonymous with the 9 processes, and therefore that human act, to be qualified as a human being in the first place, one needs to be engaged in the process of devotional service. So we do recognize that the Varnashram system is the material religious system for humanity. But then we must also recognize that devotees are very rare. That the devotees who are not necessarily required to follow the Varnashram system or develop it, they're very rare. In the Bhagavad-Gita, of course, Krishna says, out of many thousands of men, one may endeavor for perfection. And out of those few who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So when we speak in terms of human society, all the conditioned human beings in the world, Varnashram becomes very necessary, because all of these conditioned souls who are not Vaishnavas need the system of material religiosity to be elevated to the position of human being, as opposed to, as Srila Prabhupada described, polished animal life. So what can we do as aspiring Vaishnavas? And what we can do is exactly what Srila Prabhupada has asked us to do anyway. We spread the Yuga Dharma, chanting of the holy names, as far and wide as we can, by japa and by Sankirtan, public Sankirtan, and by the big Sankirtan, the Brihat Madanga, book distribution of Srila Prabhupada's transcendental literatures and literatures directly pursuant to his writings and the writings of the Vaishnavacharyas, the Bhagavad-Acharyas. And in order for us to do this, we have to say that we are among the rare who have some understanding of the Supreme Lord. This carries an immense responsibility for each of us to continue the mission of Srila Prabhupada and, again, the Bhagavad-Acharyas in our disciplic line. Srila Prabhupada, in several occasions, conversations and letters, I'm not sure where it may be printed, but he pointed out that 4 items, 4 perceptions. Utility is the principle, using whatever is available and can be used in the service of Krishna, in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in spreading the mission to elevate human society, whatever we can use. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was criticized for using motor vehicles, and but he utilized them quite successfully around India in speaking. That's just an example. Srila Prabhupada was roundly criticized for giving a second initiation to those who were just some years before basically of the quality of Mlechas and Yavanas, and yet we see the result of Srila Prabhupada's utilizing what was available, utilizing us, really, as soldiers to spread Krishna consciousness in unbelievably short period of time. It seems like a long time to us, having been initiated about 48, 49 years ago. Seems like almost an eternity, but it is a dot in eternity. It's a drop of water one drop of water in the entire monsoon in terms of time, and in such a short period, the movement of Lord Chaitanya, the Sankirtan movement, has exploded worldwide. This is amazing. It's unprecedented. And that utility is the principle, preaching is the essence, books are the basis. These are 3 of the 4. The utility is the principle, preaching is the essence, books are the basis, the Brihat Madanga, and finally purity is the force. That is most important, that the standards and the routine practices prescribed for us and the less than proper activities proscribed. In other words, we have prescriptions and proscriptions. Prescription is chanting 16 rounds minimum per day. Cleanliness. There are some basic prescriptions for us. Those must be maintained. And there are the basic proscriptions. The 4 regulative principles is basically what that boils down to. We should understand that in terms of Western civilization, or so-called civilization of the West, these 4 principles, these 4 proscriptions, the 4 regulative principles, are so drastically conservative, so drastically unheard of amongst the denizens of Western chaos, and yet so many have taken hold, have arisen out of that culture of Mlechas and Yavanas, and embraced the 4 regulative principles, embraced the prescriptions for purity, and we must maintain these standards. And Srila Prabhupada said in a number of letters that it is essential that we maintain our routine procedures. Now, routine sounds rather boring, but routine is exactly what we're talking about, to maintain the purity of ourselves and thereby the purity of the movement itself. of the Sankirtan movement. Srila Prabhupada said, example, being an exemplar, is better than precept. In other words, it is better to be a living example than to simply give instruction. He said, we must be the perfect example, then everyone else will follow. Any questions, corrections, additions, particularly additions? Oh, we have a lot of time now.
When Srila Prabhupada was concerned about Varnashram Dharma, that we could actually live off the land, take care of the cows, and have simple educational systems. The Brahmanas would do the education, of course. Kshatriyas would be managing, ruling, protecting, agriculturalists and trading business, whatnot. There's always workers, so it's a natural system, and he was eager to start the farm projects, and he was very happy about it. He could see that modern civilization will not endure. The modern technology can't do nuts and bolts, and all these people are educated now in science and engineering and wires and communication, this and that. But this is not what sustains life. Krishna and the cows, devotees, they have this lifestyle of living off the land, living simple life, because ultimately it'll all boil down to them. So how much emphasis should we, as a society, or those who are with Srila Prabhupada, what have you felt from Prabhupada about the urgency of establishing Varnashram Dharma? Make a long story short. Sorry for the long question.
No, that's helpful. Well, Srila Prabhupada, as he was departing, said that only half of his mission was complete. The other half was to direct, inspire the inculcation of the Varnashram system. And as Panchagoda Prabhu says, this is based on self-sufficiency. We have the hellish cities in the world, throughout the world, and hellish conditions even in many small towns. If suddenly there were no petrol, no electricity to charge electric vehicles, millions and millions of people would starve. They don't know how to produce their own food. Some of the big cities, I suspect that the children grow up thinking that water comes out of a shiny thing on the wall, food comes from the supermarket. There's no concept of how to survive. And so this idea of self-sufficient communities was very dear to Srila Prabhupada, and he loved a number of the projects, particularly in Pennsylvania, Gitanagari, as example, or New Vrindavan as well, and there are increasing around the world. I've heard stories of wonderful rural projects in Eastern Europe, especially, and these are forerunners of what must become the Varnashram system in the future, and we should be working towards that. Many of us are more inclined to that sort of work, to cultivation of land, to protection of cows. We should not feel that, because I'm not going out and distributing books, that, well, I'm somehow or other less. Now that is something that we can all do, but there are some skills involved in book distribution that are learned skills. We don't all have the opportunity to go out and do Harinam in public. Where I live, there are very few devotees. It's 3.5 hours from a temple. There really aren't any downtowns. There's just these tiny little towns here, and they're scattered all over the place. We don't do street sankirtan. We do kirtan, sankirtan in halls, have many guests, and we do have programs, but we don't actually have a temple there. It's an ideal place for a rural community, except we're in the West where the property is ridiculously expensive, but it can still be done, and there are some devotees nearby in a rural area that do have cows, that do grow crops, and we're able to acquire from them ahimsa milk from cows that are not going to be sent off to slaughter. And we're very thankful of that, and we like to help with the expansion of that. We should all be thinking in these terms as we're spreading the Sankirtan movement. Again, it was very dear to Srila Prabhupada that these rural communities develop and gradually become self-sufficient. It has proved in a number of cases, maybe in most of the cases, that full self-sufficiency is long coming, because there are so many connections in the outside world. Many places have to pay property taxes, which is not really something that you would expect or plan for in a varnashram system. Therefore, somehow or other, Lakshmi would have to be generated. But that, again, by growing crops, by protecting the cows, by living the simple life within the temple functions, and setting an example. Again, the example of purity, the example of simplicity, while being very advanced philosophically. It's not simpletons out in the country. It's not a bunch of yokels. It's very advanced souls who generally can debate circles around just about any non-devotee intellectual. And so we have very special people, and we must be very special people to further this movement.
Miracle of coming and changing people's lives by finding those and awakening the spirit is always something very attractive for devotees. Tell us a few minutes, because I know it's limited time, but how did you meet Prabhupada, and what inspired you to take up Krishna consciousness?
Oh, all right. I have to talk about myself now. Huh? Well, okay.
Prabhupada's miracle.
I was raised in a family that my parents' families were both sides of the family. They were Seventh-day Adventists, so they were already vegetarians at least, but very confused about God, very shallow understanding. Moral people, certainly reflecting the mode of goodness. However, my parents were the black sheeps. They were the drinkers, the smokers. They were both very intelligent people, but not at all religious or inclined spiritually. My mother was a very accomplished concert pianist. My father was an executive with an airline, and then later on with a defense contractor and the U.S. Air Force. So I had no real spiritual background. A little bit of contact with Seventh-day Adventists, and I had a lot of Jewish friends growing up whose families were fairly Orthodox, and picked up a little there, but nothing significant. And then after high school, I did a little bit of college in Hawaii. Mostly I was there to go surfing. But gradually, and this is in the middle 60s, the big revolution, so-called, in society in America, the spoiled baby boomers who were pampered all through their youth. Srila Prabhupada said we were all the sons of rich men, which when you come to India, and I also traveled extensively in North Africa, in the Middle East, and India, and elsewhere, and I could see that we are the sons of rich men coming from the West. We were so pampered and so spoiled, and we rebelled because it was empty. It was, as we called it then, plastic. It was artificial lifestyle, and began looking for truth. Basically, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now is the time to inquire into what's going on. So my impetus was to try to figure out what's going on. And several years and a lot of travels, a couple of years, and as I said, a lot of traveling in different parts of the world, and studying different religious traditions, all that I could find. But all along, I always had a bunch of books with me in my duffel bag as I traveled. Very few clothes, very little of anything else but a lot of books, and several versions of the Bhagavad-Gita. Of course, they were relatively bogey versions. One that I appreciated very much was a translation a poetic translation without any commentary by an Englishman, Sir Edwin Arnold, and he entitled it simply The Song of God. And even the introduction was just, he didn't get into personalism or impersonalism. It was just a very beautiful translation, and I was always impressed with that. And I also read quite a bit of Thomas Merton's writings. Thomas Merton was I believe, a Franciscan monk, intellectual, who happened to write a tremendous, everyone who has the opportunity should look up the original Macmillan Gita, the abridged purple edition, if you can find it online, or Thomas Merton's foreword in there. It's several pages long, and it's very potent. It's obviously a bhakta. I was very impressed with that. When I returned to Hawaii in early 1970, I had come to the conclusion that, well, fortunately, I had concluded a while before that I wasn't God after all. There were certain symptoms I can't see behind me. I can't even see my own eyes. What speak of seeing outside the building? Can't see my own eyes except in a mirror, and that's just a reflection. So I had come to that conclusion. Also, one who thinks he's God has to really give it serious thought when he's going to the bathroom. It's rather incongruous. And I knew that God was our source. And how can someone be happy if they don't act according to what they are? By our constitution, we're parts and parcels of God. I didn't understand it in that terminology at that time, But then a close friend who I had been involved with in surfing, but also in yoga and a lot of philosophical discussions, and he's now known as Siddha Swarupananda Maharaj. I went and to visit with him when I returned to Hawaii, and lo and behold, he had become a Vaishnava and had all these people following him. And we talked for a bit, and he just handed me a copy of the newly published Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And that book told me, okay, here's how you serve God on his own terms. I understood I needed to serve God, and I understood that there were all kinds of invented ways by religions all over the world, by religious traditions, invented ways to serve God, but how do you serve God on his own terms? And that's came from Srila Prabhupada's Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. About 2 days later, I joined up. I had found what I was searching for, and very quickly they shipped me from Hawaii in the middle of winter, wearing flip-flops, to Brooklyn, New York, 4 inches of snow. And I got on the wrong train, and wound up 2 miles from the Henry Street Temple, and walked in the middle of the night through the snowy streets, and I don't know what I was stepping in, but it wasn't just snow. And finally got to the front door of 439 Henry Street, and that was it. I was in. Once somebody finally answered the door in the middle of the night, Chandanacharya Prabhu answered the door, and 2 days later, Bhavananda was the president. He said, well, I need a temple commander. I want you to do that. There was like 80 devotees there. Temple commander, what is that? What does that mean? I never told anybody what to do in my life. But anyway, I got a little training there. About 7 months later, Srila Prabhupada came to Brooklyn, and well, he came into the airport, and I remember just being stunned. Of course, there were hundreds and hundreds of devotees there from all over the East Coast, and many from around the world. And I just remember how Srila Prabhupada glowed. He had that, it was just a glow. Of course, the devotees were all bright and happy and wearing their orange bed sheets and yellow bed sheets and such, but Srila Prabhupada just glowed. And I don't remember a lot about his lectures there. I do remember when I was initiated a few days later, and he awarded me, I guess, the name Mahendra Das. He said, Mahendra Das, Mahendra is Krishna who has the biggest senses. So you are servant of he who has the biggest senses. Do not become big servant of the senses. And shortly after that, the word came that Srila Prabhupada wanted 40 or 50 devotees to come to India. So, somehow or other, Brahmananda stuck me on that list. I don't know how, anyway, I don't know how I got on that list. However, I got my passport renewed, was raring to go, and then the GBC for the East Coast, that part of the East Coast at that time was Rupanuga Prabhu. And he said, well, the temple president in Pittsburgh just left. It's kind of chaotic. I want you to go out there. So I spent 4 years, then about 4 years out in Pittsburgh. In the end, I was the temple president for a couple of years, and we tried to stress book distribution, and we did for a medium temple, we were quite successful. Srila Prabhupada did come twice through Pittsburgh. Once he stayed in Pittsburgh. We had at that point, we had a big mansion that had been, it's now part of a historic register or something, but because of the lack of parking and zoning problems there, it was in the most upscale neighborhood of Pittsburgh.
Was New Vrindavan there at that time?
New Vrindavan was there, yes. We were, well, they were in New Vrindavan, I think, beginning in '68. Hayagriva, Kirtananda, and then others following along. So Srila Prabhupada came once. We did several big programs in Pittsburgh in '72, I believe it was. And that's when we had the big mansion, which we had to give up later. Again, there was no parking, which was unfortunate, and there were zoning problems. After Pittsburgh that time, then he spent a good while in New Vrindavan. I think 8 or 10 days in New Vrindavan. That was in 1972. And there was they did a very big festival at New Vrindavan during that time. Then 2 years later, he came again. He just passed through Pittsburgh. At that time, we had a great location, but not much facility. It was a beaten up old building, but it was 2 blocks from Carnegie Mellon University and 2 blocks from the University of Pittsburgh. And we were bringing in quite a few new devotees, but we didn't have much facility. About half the people we brought in, we would ship off to the Radha Damodar parties, and a few would go to New Vrindavan. But when he came that time, General Motors was experimenting with if a seatbelt wasn't fastened and there was any weight on that seat, the ignition wouldn't work. You couldn't start the car. Well, they had there was a Cadillac, and for Srila Prabhupada to ride to New Vrindavan, and Brahmananda, a very large boy, got in one of the back seat positions and promptly broke this system, so the car wouldn't start. So we had to scramble, and Kaladri found some vehicle to take Srila Prabhupada to New Vrindavan, but it was not so comfortable. So it turned out then that I had a small station wagon that we used for Sankirtan, for traveling Sankirtan, and for Sankirtan around the Pittsburgh area. So I wound up having the opportunity to drive Srila Prabhupada to morning walks and between the different farms at New Vrindavan for 4 or 5 days, and that was wonderful. Of course, being around Srila Prabhupada, you just get tongue-tied, and so I just listened. I rarely said a word, and I also had the responsibility to make Srila Prabhupada's ice cream every afternoon. We would make ice cream on a hand grinder like this, and I would take the milk, the New Vrindavan milk, which was wonderful. Most of the milk at that time was coming from Jersey cows, and very rich. And I would cheat and add some additional cream, and make blueberry one day, strawberry ice cream another day. The day we made Kaladri Prabhu got some mangoes, and so we make mango ice cream. Well, I added a little bit too much cream, so the mango ice cream looked beautiful. Srila Prabhupada loved it. When we tasted some remnants, in fact, Srila Prabhupada asked for seconds that day. When we tasted it, some of the little orange chunks in there weren't mango. It was butter that had churned because I had added so much extra cream. So it was chunks of butter, ice cream, and mango. And it was quite interesting. Then by some arrangement, the GBC decided to turn over the Pittsburgh Yatra, and later on also Cleveland and others, to New Vrindavan as part of the New Vrindavan project. And I was asked to go to Philadelphia, and we were able to build up the book distribution significantly there during that year because I took all the book distributors. And then I was asked at the 1976 Mayapur Vrindavan Festival, in fact, here somewhere, Rameshwara and Jayatirth, I believe, and perhaps Bhagavan as well, said we would like to have you come to LA and just help with the day-to-day management in the BBT, which was a wonderful blessing. And I continued in that capacity from early '76 until 1988, and at which time book distribution, unfortunately, had dwindled, and it was quite unfortunate. And I had an offer which I couldn't refuse, and from my uncle to help him with his construction business, and so I went into heavy and highway construction, engineering and such for about for about 12 or 13 years. In the meantime, my wife has started a related business, traffic control, flaggers and signs like that through those road construction zones. And that exploded so nicely that I had to quit what I was doing and become her employee, which of course I have been for 45 years anyway. We had all through that period, which was 28, 30 years, we had a lot of devotee association. We had devotee employees. And of course, we lived in an area where the Southern California temples had started a Gurukula in 1979, a rural Gurukula, 400 acres adjoining Sequoia National Park in the Sierra Nevada, and had wonderful potential, but when book distribution collapsed, they were unable to support the mortgage, and the operating expenses were covered, but the mortgage itself became such a burden that it had to be given up. Well, in the time that it was there, many of us had moved into that area, and the temple was there at the Gurukula, and so we had the temple. And even though we were working, I was working at that time all over the western United States, had a lot of wonderful association, and so now many of us have stayed there. There are several dozen Prabhupada disciples and next generation devotees there, and we do have regular programs. And unfortunately, no rural activity at this time other than the people up the mountain in an area called Badger. They do have cow protection like that, but it's they have difficult finances as well, and so it's not, most of them work jobs, and but we hope to eventually develop more there. It is a very conservative area, which sometimes that means very difficult dealings with some of the reformed Reformation Christian people. They just don't want to hear about anything that might threaten their economic development. But there's a lot of receptive people at the same time. And a lot of devotees originally came from Fresno State University, which is about 50 miles away. Fresno's, I think, the 4th largest city now in California. And so Fresno State is quite a major school. And we do Maharaj Das, and I accompany him quite often. Well, I intend to, and I have several occasions. We set up a book table in the free speech area, and have had a number of people come to our programs 40 miles away in Visalia, in the town of Visalia, who were students who've contacted us there. And he has, on the book table, there are books in several languages. There are a lot, even Arabic, and we do find quite a few Arabic students and students who speak Arabic. Anything, anyone have any comments, questions, corrections? Hari Bol. Hare Krishna. Ki Jai.